And still I rise, Mr. Speaker. And I rise at this moment in time to preview my articles of impeachment. To preview, not to present, but to preview my articles of impeachment. And before giving this preview, I'd like to thank a couple of people. There are many that I should thank, but there are a couple that I will thank. I'd like to thank a couple of people for what they have done in assisting me with these articles of impeachment. My dear friend John Boniface, who has been with me from the genesis of this, when we brought articles of impeachment against President Trump previously, laid the foundation for it. When people said it can only be done if certain things exist, and then later on retracted all of that when they were ready to move forward, or had to move forward, to be quite candid with you, because the momentum have shifted and it built up to the extent that you had notables like the Honorable John Lewis supporting the articles of impeachment that I drafted and placed before this House, and other members who were holding positions of leadership in the House of Representatives signed on to the articles of impeachment. So the tide had turned, and there was little choice but to go along with what the people wanted, not what we were doing at the time, but what the people wanted and the people were demanding. So I'm very proud to thank John for what he has done to assist. But there's also another person who provided me with some very sage advice, someone that I have great respect for and have admired over the decades. Ralph Nader. Many of you may not know the name, but Mr. Nader was a crusader for justice of the highest magnitude. He took stands when others wouldn't even speak the words that he stood on. And I'm proud to thank him for what he has done to assist in helping me to draw conclusions about these articles of impeachment. So let's preview the impeachment process and the articles that I intend to introduce. I said I would, and I will. First, let's start with what is impeachment? I think that because this is something that people hear about, and a good many people will conclude that articles of impeachment must contain something related to a constitutional crisis. There is no necessity for a constitutional crisis to impeach. None. You can, but most of the articles of impeachment have not related to a constitutional crisis. The first person to ever have been impeached was a judge. And it wasn't because there was a constitutional crisis, it was because of his behavior on the bench. And because he was consuming alcohol at a time when he should have been taking his lofty position and adjudicating appropriately. No constitutional crisis. Not only do you not need a constitutional crisis, you don't have to be convicted of a crime. And that doesn't have to be a codified criminal statute that has been violated. None of that is necessary for impeachment. No need to commit a crime. Best example, my colleague who used to sit right over there on this row, at the end of this row. My colleague who sat there, I was here with him for more than a decade. The Honorable Alcee Hastings. He was a federal judge. He was tried and found not guilty of alleged offenses. After he was tried and found not guilty of alleged offenses, his colleagues put together a committee, and they drew a different conclusion about his behavior. They took their conclusion to the Senate of the United States of America, to the House of Representatives, and my dear friend and brother was impeached and removed from office. But because I am a believer, I often say there is a God. He was thereafter elected to the Congress of the United States of America. The point is, however, notwithstanding him having been found not guilty, the Senate found reason to impeach him. And he was impeached for something that he had been found not guilty of by a jury of his peers, pursuant to the Constitution of the United States of America. You don't have to be found guilty of a crime to be impeached. Now, along this very line, I would say this in terms of being found guilty. That means that if you have been found guilty of crimes, you can be brought before this body if you fall within what the Constitution allows for impeachment. You can be brought before this body by way of impeachment. You can be brought before the Congress if you have committed 34 felonies. If you've committed 34 felonies, you can be brought before the Congress for impeachment if you happen to hold one of the offices presented to us by way of the Constitution of the United States of America, such that you might be impeached. 34 felonies, yeah, you can be impeached for that. But I'm not going to talk about those felonies today. I want you to understand something that Gerald Ford said about impeachment, former President of the United States of America. Because there are some people who have read the Federalist Papers. I've read them. I've read the words of Hamilton, the words of Jay, words of Madison. I've read them. And they now have come to these lofty conclusions about what impeachment is. Well, I'm going to tell you the truth about what it is, and I defy any one of these constitutional scholars to contradict with evidence that supports something antithetical to what I'm saying. Gerald Ford got it right, President. Got it right. He said impeachment, and I'm paraphrasing, these are not his exact words. He said impeachment is whatever a given Congress, whenever they vote for 218, majority vote of a given Congress, whenever a given Congress will vote in the majority for articles of impeachment on a given day, that will be an impeached person, because impeachment is whatever a majority of Congress says it is on a given day. Now, that was more close to what he said. Whatever a given Congress says it is on a given day. And a given Congress would mean a majority of the people voting for impeachment. There is no appeal. It is a political question by definition. And as a political question by definition, it doesn't go to another court if someone differs, or the Supreme Court. It goes to the Senate. And the Senate has the trial. This is why Andrew Johnson could be impeached in 1868, Article 10 of the Articles of Impeachment against him, for speaking ill of Congress. You can be impeached for saying bad things about Congress. Andrew Johnson was. So let's get one thing straight. All of you constitutional scholars who want to convince people that there is some lofty definition that you have studied for some number of years, and now you've come to conclusions that most people can't understand. My dear brothers and sisters, impeachment is whatever a majority of Congress says it is on a given time, on a given day. That's impeachment. So if Congress chooses to impeach because of the tie that you're wearing at a given time, I wear this tie. There's some people who don't appreciate it as much as I do. Be impeached. Now, members of Congress cannot be impeached. We're not included in the definition of persons who may be impeached. So now let's talk about impeachment that I plan to file. These impeachment articles have been drafted. I have gone over them. They've been in my hands for now some time that exceeds the finished product was actually in my hands for probably a week or so. But I wanted to do some additional things, so I checked, and I've changed and added a few things. But I've had these impeachment articles, and there's a target-rich environment when dealing with this president when it comes to impeachment. So knowing where to start is the issue. Not is there a place to start, but knowing where to start is the issue. So I'll be introducing these articles of impeachment, and I'm just going to go straight to one of the articles or maybe the article. I've got options. I may delete some things when I introduce. But I want to just mention this option because it's the one that people talk about in words other than what I will present. They talk about this impeachment. They say that he's a threat to democracy. They say that he disrespects the Constitution. They say these things, but I'm not sure that everybody who says these things is truly interested in the consequences related to what the president should suffer for doing these things. I'm not sure that they want to see the consequences. I think that there are some people who literally just enjoy saying the president is destroying democracy. The president does not honor the constitutional provision related to respecting a person's right to a trial, fair trial, which brings along with it the whole notion that you just can't pick a person up off the street, send them to a foreign country with an indefinite sentence. Just lock them up. Pick them up off the street, take them to a foreign country, lock them up. Indefinite amount of time. There has to be some sense of reality associated with what we do, and I want to talk about that sense of reality. This president is defying court orders, including orders from the Supreme Court of the United States of America. He is defying. You've heard him say now in two venues. I'm going to speak about both of them briefly in just a moment. But he said in two venues that he's not going to honor the necessity for a person to have what we call due process. Two venues, he said it. Now, the president didn't come out and say, I'm not going to honor due process. No. But he has said what a reasonable and prudent person can conclude as his indication of not going to honor due process of the law, which is something the Constitution requires if you're going to take life or liberty or property from a person. Person has to have due process. It's got to be able to say, if you're going to take a person and lock them up, they've got to be able to say, hey, you got the wrong guy. And they ought to be able to say it to someone other than the arresting person. They ought to be able to say it to someone who has authority over the arresting person. You ought to be able to go to a disinterested third party. We call that the judiciary in this country. Some member of the judiciary or some judge go before a judge and say, Judge, you got the wrong person. You ought to be able to use the great writ of habeas corpus to get yourself before a judge. You ought not be taken out of the country before you have that opportunity. And then if you are out of the country, the Supreme Court can tell you that you ought to facilitate the return of that person. That's what the Supreme Court has said. And that's what this president is refusing to do, refusing to honor the Supreme Court's order. I call that in Article 1 of my Articles of Impeachment, devolving democracy within the United States into a dictatorship with himself as a de facto dictator. A de facto dictator. My friends, truth be told, we are now into a de facto dictatorship with a de facto dictator. Not a dictatorship that has been declared by some official body, but when the President of the United States declines to honor orders of the Supreme Court of the United States of America, he becomes the person who decides not only that a person should be pursued under the authority of the executive branch, he has now disregarded the separation of powers, and he's now encroached upon the supremacy of the judiciary, a co-equal branch of government. He dispenses with the necessity for the judiciary to perform its functions. And in so doing, he has become a de facto dictator. A de facto dictator. Now, this is not in my impeachment orders, but I have to bring this up because of the impact that he's having. I'll talk more about what's in my articles in just a moment. But I want to mention this. Could be in, but I want to mention this. He, as a de facto dictator, the president is engaging in de facto ethnic cleansing. The removal without due process. Oh, I know it's not the kind of ethnic cleansing that most people are acclimated to. Yes, I understand that this is a nouveau ethnic cleansing. Nouveau de facto ethnic cleansing. Removing people without due process to another country without the person being able to go before some disinterested third party and saying, you got the wrong person. Making the allegation that the person is a part of some gang of thugs. Well, a federal judge addressed that. A federal judge addressed that. And here's what the federal judge said. I've got it right here. I have it here. Here's what the federal judge said. So what? So what? You're a member of a gang? So now you're not entitled to due process? Due process is accorded you not because you are a person who is living the high life, whining and dining with the billionaire class, living in the sweets of life, having your galas, engaging in the various cocktail events, known to all of the people as an honorable person. Yes, that person deserves due process, but also every person in this country deserves due process if you're going to deprive them of life, liberty, or property. They are required due process under the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, if you don't respect the Constitution, well then, you can make these decisions, which is what the president does. If you don't respect the Constitution, you can decide that if you're a member of some gang, I can deport you to some other country, let's just say El Salvador, some other country, I can deport you to that country without due process because you're a gang member. Well, it won't be long before some person who's not a gang member gets deported. So this federal judge got it right. In essence, he said, so what? If this person's a gang member, still entitled to due process. I almost admire to some extent the way this president can persuade people to believe this level of inanity. This level of inanity, not insanity, inanity. How he's able to do this, because he's able to convince people that it's more who you are as opposed to what you've done is more important. If you're associated with a gang, then you've lost your constitutional rights. That's what he's inculcating in our society. He wants to make that normal. If you allow this to be normal, if we allow this to be normal, if I allow this to be normal, we are disserving the people, in my case, that I represent. The Constitution doesn't allow this, but this president thinks he's above the law. So he says, a member of a gang did some other dastardly deeds. As a result, he makes the case, this is what people elected me to do. Violate the 13th Amendment. Just get them out of the country. My friends, if you have noticed, most of the people who are being removed from the country, unfortunately, are Latinos. So now I take a stand for the Latino community because, Mr. President, you, sir, have caused Latinos to become suspect. I lived at a time when I was suspect in this country, when just being black in America made you a suspect. The Latino community, now I've talked to people who have no reason to be in fear, but they are, because they see what's happening. And they see who it's happening to with a great degree of regularity. And because they see it, they are fearful of what can happen to them. And they are fearful that if they're not careful, they can be picked up, taken away to another country without due process. People are paying attention. If you can do this to one person, why can't you do it to another? And it looks like you're trying to get a certain group of people out of the country. Some of the evidence to support what I say, well, how about this? President wants to give people thousands of dollars to bring new birth to America, new lives, to birth babies, thousands of dollars. When you've got people who are already here, people who are already participating, paying into the tax system, persons who are abiding by the law, and now you have literally concluded that either they will leave by way of some of the things that you're doing that are antithetical to the Constitution, or you're going to force them to self-deport. Yes, I have many people in my congressional district that are Latinos. And yes, the president is trying his level best to get them to self-deport. So it's not just the people who've committed crimes that he's after. You don't have to have studied his behavior very long to see that it is people who are not of a certain ethnicity, not of a certain race, that he's concerned with. If he were true to what he says, he wouldn't be saying we've got to have more babies and then wanting to put millions of people out of this country who are law-abiding. Many of them we call dreamers, who came here not of their own volition, came here, made a life here. Well, didn't decide to come, but they're here, made a life. I've had to go across the border to bring people back that were deported improperly. But have these people here in this country, making America a better country by their very presence in the country. Not everybody's going to invent something to make America great. Work hard, treat people right. You can be a good citizen and make America great. You don't have to do the things that are going to be written across the pages of time. You can do the simple things, and these people are doing these things. They've made our lives better. So you want to kick them out, some by accusing them of crimes, never convicting them, sending a person never convicted to prison in another country, but others by bullying them out, using your bully pulpit and your agents, all of whom now speak with such a degree of disdain for people. It's just remarkable to hear them, the way they address the issues. That you have developed cohorts who have all become little bullies. They want to emulate you and your aggressive behavior in indicating what they're going to do to people. Okay, well, what you give, you shall receive. It'll come back to you. But the point is, you are removing people simply because of who they are, and you want to now increase the population by giving women money, people, that's husband and wife, two people, money, I suppose to, I don't know, the way I've heard it, I think it just sounds like he's expecting the one gender to carry this load, and it is it's a challenge if you're doing it just to get money. I would hope that people wouldn't say, well, I'm going to have a child because I can get $5,000. Probably there are very few people who will. But you're changing the dynamics, or desire to, when you already have people here. I wanted to mention this because this is a form of nouveau, de facto ethnic cleansing that the president is engaging in. Now, to the articles of impeachment, these articles have two places wherein, maybe three, wherein the president has confessed. One place where the president has confessed. How much time do I have left, Mr. Speaker?
The gentleman has 24 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One place wherein the president has left is, has expressed concerns that ought to cause all Americans to want to see some change, to see him have to be dealt with for what he said and what he's doing. I have in my hand a passage styled, President Trump meets with President of El Salvador. So there are three different things that I'll call to your attention related to impeachment. The first is this meeting in the Oval Office. Now, I'm about to read to you something that was published by C-SPAN. If you want the details, you can go to the actual event on C-SPAN and see what I'm telling you. So this is no secret. Some of the news media has picked up on it as of late, and they're talking about it. So here's what it says. Here's how it reads. Here's what it states. During an Oval Office meeting, and I'm going to paraphrase some of this, with the president of El Salvador, President Donald Trump and members of his administration argued that they were not required to return deported Salvadorian citizen Kilmar Abrigo Garcia. Some things bear repeating. I say this quite often. Seems like there's a lot that bears repeating. Not required to return this Salvadorian citizen to the United States, in spite of the Supreme Court ruling in favor of facilitating his return. Supreme Court of the United States of America, co-equal branch of the government, separation of powers, not required to return him, not facilitating it. That's what the president thinks, not required to do it, doesn't have to facilitate his return. And note that they said facilitate. There's a judge that has explained it in great detail what facilitate means. It's a beautifully written opinion. It goes on to say that the president, and I'm paraphrasing, of El Salvador, that he said he was not authorized to return Mr. Garcia. Now, they're sitting in the same room. President of El Salvador, United States president, seated next to each other, juxtaposed right there next to each other for all the world to see, on C-SPAN if you want to see it. And so he says he's not authorized to return Mr. Garcia, who was legally present in the U.S. before being deported in March. That's what C-SPAN says, legally present in the U.S. Legally present, deported to El Salvador without due process. C-SPAN doesn't have due process right here, but that's what happened. Goes on to say, the Trump administration alleged that he was a member of the MS-13 gang. Well, I already covered that. Allege all you want about his behavior. It does not negate his right to due process under the law. I only regret that you're not sitting and standing right there right now, Mr. President, so that you could hear me say it to you to your face. He's entitled to due process of the law. Member of MS-13, look, if he is and he's committed a crime, try him, convict him. Nobody wants to defend members of MS-13. But being a member of a gang does not deprive one of due process of the law. And it goes on to indicate here, but previously admitted that the deportation was an administrative error. Talk about adding insult to injury. The administration says we deported this person, not to demean him, Mr. Garcia, deported him by way of an administrative error. Made a mistake. Deported him by mistake, administrative error. But still you refuse to facilitate his return? What is wrong with you? Have you no respect for the Constitution? You don't have to respect Mr. Garcia. You don't have to respect me. But I want you to respect my constitutional rights. And I want you to respect his constitutional rights, because the minute I decide that it's okay for you to disrespect his constitutional rights, I've decided it's okay for you to disrespect my constitutional rights. Respect constitutional rights. Mr. Garcia merits that level of respect. But I also indicate in the Articles of Impeachment that this president demeans the judiciary. And I think there's much evidence to support my position. But what I'd like to do is give you what I see as some of the, well, a piece of the best evidence. Now, I believe this to be the best evidence. This is on Truth Social. I'm told that Mr. Trump is either the owner or one of the owners of Truth Social. And this is a tweet that bears the name Donald J. Trump. I don't think he's ever denied making this tweet. And here's what it says in part. It says, and he's talking about a federal judge now, this radical left lunatic of a judge. He's notorious for calling people lunatics. I was at home looking at TV. I'd been escorted out of the chamber. I was seated right over there. And when I made my comments about the president not having a mandate to cut Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, Speaker did what was required of him. Officers did what was required. I'm not mad at any of them. When you protest, be prepared to suffer the consequences. You don't have to like them, and I don't. But I wasn't here, so I was at home. He uses that word lunatic, and he used it against people sitting right here on this side of the aisle. Called the members of the Democratic Party lunatics from that podium. Lunatics. He's never been reprimanded. He's never been sanctioned. This House could issue a resolution of reprimand if we had the guts, if we had the intestinal fortitude. To quote someone that I have learned to respect over the years, Malcolm X. If you just had the chitlings, you could reprimand him for it. Let him know that there are some lines that he can't cross. Let him know that he can't come in our house and call members of the Democratic Party lunatics, or call a member of the Senate Pocahontas. Let him know that there are boundaries. You can still get elected. So he uses the word lunatic here, and I'm going to read it again. This radical left lunatic of a judge, a troublemaker, an agitator, who was sadly appointed by Barack Hussein Obama, was not elected president. That's the preamble. Now let's go down to the heart of it. He says, this judge, like many of the crooked judges, I have to say it again, some things bear repeating. This judge, like many of the crooked judges, I am forced to appear before. 34 felony convictions. 34. That's not here, so I'll read it all again. This judge, like many of the crooked judges I am forced to appear before, should be impeached. The President of the United States calling for the impeachment of a judge because he doesn't like the decision of the court. What about respect for a co-equal branch of government? What about separation of powers? What about honoring the law that you've sworn to uphold? This judge, like many of the crooked judges I am forced to appear before, should be impeached. We don't want vicious, violent, demented criminals, many of them deranged murderers in our country. Make America great again. This is from the President of the United States of America. It would be hard to convince a reasonable and prudent person who hasn't been through all of this that the president would say such a thing. The Justice of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, took issue with the president. The Chief Justice took issue with him. He sent a message indicating that we don't impeach judges because we differ with them. We appeal. But he's defying the orders of federal courts and of the Supreme Court of the United States of America. That's what he's doing. How much time, Mr. Speaker?
The gentleman has 11 minutes.
11 minutes? Did I hear 11, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, the gentleman has 11 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your kindness. So he's defying the federal courts. Once you do this, you become a de facto dictator. You reduce the country to a de facto dictatorship. And for this, you must be impeached. The articles will go into many other aspects of this, but for these things, you must be impeached. These articles of impeachment I shall bring. I have said that I would and I will. But I want to give everybody notice right now, take note of this. They will not be the only articles of impeachment because the president has done various things that merit impeachment, and at least I'm going to build a record so that posterity will know how some of us stood during this time of crisis when the president was violating the Constitution. So I'll be bringing at least one additional occurrence where there would be articles of impeachment presented to this House, maybe more than one more, but I'm not going to allow this Congress to escape having a record of what this president is doing. So yes, I'm going to bring my articles of impeachment. And I know that the president, once he hears the things that I've said, he'll try to find some way to weasel out. Oh, I call that pickpocket politics. When you catch the pickpocket trying to lift something from your person, and then you decide, oh, well, I really wasn't taking that, I'm sorry, just bumped into you. Well, the president always tries to retract. And what I'm amazed at is that the media will allow him to take the last thing he says as what he really meant. You'd never do that for Barack Obama. You'd never do that for God bless him, the last president of the United States, the Honorable Joe Biden. You'd never do that. But you take the last thing this president says, regardless as to what else he says about how he's going to enforce his tariffs and what he's going to do with them. Once he sees that it's not working and he starts to retreat, he starts to meander back, to crawl back, then you take that, oh, well, the president really meant this. What he was saying before was to acquire a bargaining position. Well, Canada didn't think so. Canada didn't think it was just a bargaining position when he said he wanted to make Canada the 51st state. Greenland didn't think so. Why do we want to think that what this man says last is what he meant at first, when what he said at first totally contradicts what he said at last? It makes no sense. So, Mr. President, you shall have articles of impeachment presented by Al Green, member of Congress, because I'll be fulfilling my constitutional responsibility to do so.